The studio lights were warm. The stage was polished. The audience was ready. But the tension in the air didn't come from the cameras. It came from the silence between two men who had agreed to speak, but not necessarily to agree. Denzel Washington had agreed to appear on Joe Rogan's show after months of back and forth. His team had been cautious. His conditions were clear. No politicized baiting. No selective editing. No reduction of his work or his integrity into viral sound bites. Joe Rogan had nodded. He said it would be a real conversation. Unscripted. Honest. But Joe had his own ideas about what that meant. The interview started calm enough. Denzel talked about his latest film, the emotional toll of preparing for a role that dealt with justice, betrayal, and grief. Joe asked about method acting. Denzel explained his process. The audience, watching live, leaned in. Then Joe shifted. He said, "You've played a lot of heroes. A lot of guys who stand up to the system. But in real life, how much of that do you believe in? Or is it just acting?" Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Joe shrugged. "I mean, it's Hollywood. Everyone talks about truth and values, but it's all scripted. Do you actually live the way your characters do? Or is it just for the screen?" There was a pause. Not dramatic. Just enough to let the tension breathe. Denzel said, "You invited me here to talk. Not to question whether I live what I say. That's not a question. That's an accusation." Joe smiled, as if trying to lighten the mood. "It's not personal. I just think people should be honest about who they are, especially when they preach." Denzel didn't blink. "You think I'm a fraud?" Joe raised his hands. "I didn't say that." "You implied it," Denzel said. "Let's be real. You wanted this moment. You wanted to corner me. Because challenging someone on principle makes for good TV." Joe leaned forward. "No. I just think people get tired of celebrities lecturing them when they don't live by the same rules." And Denzel replied, calmly, clearly, and without raising his voice, "I served. You sold out." The audience gasped. Now, before you hear what Denzel says next, and before you see the moment that left the entire studio in stunned silence, I need to tell you something. Clips like this don't survive long. They get edited, taken down, rewritten by headlines that soften the blow. But here, you're going to hear the truth as it happened. Uncut, unfiltered, and exactly as it shook the room. So if you're tired of curated sound bites and want to be part of a space that refuses to water down the truth, then hit that subscribe button right now, before this moment disappears into spin, censorship, or silence. Because what happens next, they didn't expect. Joe Rogan opened his mouth to respond, but Denzel cut him off. "You built this show on the idea of questioning everything. But you only question the people who don't fit your narrative. When someone like me shows up and doesn't fall into your stereotype, you get uncomfortable." Joe said, "You're twisting this." "No," Denzel said. "I'm revealing it. You don't want conversation. You want confirmation. And when you don't get it, you push until someone cracks." Joe tried to laugh it off. "Man, it's not that deep." Denzel leaned forward. "Yes, it is. Because people watch this. They take you seriously. And when you spend your platform attacking people who are trying to do good, just because they don't do it your way, you're not helping. You're eroding trust. In art. In truth. In each other." The room was silent. Joe looked rattled. And Denzel was just getting started. Denzel's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel underneath. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence did the work for him. Joe Rogan leaned back slightly in his chair, trying to reset the tone, trying to pull the conversation back into something manageable. But that moment was already gone. Joe said, "Look, I'm not trying to attack you, man. I just think a lot of people are tired of Hollywood pretending to be the moral compass when it's one of the most corrupt industries out there." Denzel nodded. "You're not wrong about the industry. I've seen the rot. I felt it. But you don't get to lump everyone in and act like you're the only one outside the system." Joe frowned. "I'm not Hollywood." Denzel leaned forward. "You've built a media empire off the same tools. You sell vitamins, outrage, and certainty, And you call it truth. That's show business too. There was a shift in the audience, a stillness. The kind of silence that only comes when people are afraid to breathe. Joe responded, I talk to everyone. I give people a platform. Denzel replied instantly. And do you hold them accountable? Joe hesitated. Denzel pressed. Or do you let them say whatever they want? Then shrug and say, I'm just a guy asking questions when people get hurt. Joe crossed his arms. So now I'm responsible for what every guest says. Denzel's tone didn't rise, but his words cut sharper. No, but you're responsible for what you normalize, for what you nod along to, for when you laugh instead of challenge. Joe said, You think I should censor my guests? Denzel shook his head. I think you should remember you're not just having beers with your buddies anymore. You've got a bigger reach than most newsrooms. That comes with weight. Joe went quiet. Denzel continued. You built this platform. You earned it. But now you have to choose. Do you use it to elevate the conversation, or just keep profiting off the chaos? There was a pause, the kind that couldn't be edited out. Joe looked down at the table, then back up. You came here ready to fight. Denzel smiled slightly. No, I came here ready to speak plainly. Something you say you value. Or is that only true when the plain truth flatters you? The control booth lit up with internal chatter. One producer asked, Do we cut it? Another said, If we cut this, we're the exact thing he's accusing us of. The feed stayed live. Joe tried one more angle. He said, So what? I'm the villain now? I'm the threat. Denzel replied, The threat isn't you, Joe. It's the myth you've become. The idea that being loud means being right. That being popular means being principled. Joe stared, visibly shaken. And then Denzel stood up. Not dramatically, just deliberately. He said, You wanted real. You got it. I won't sit here and pretend this is just another conversation. Not when there's too much at stake. Joe stood too, reflexively. You're walking out. Denzel paused. No, I'm walking on. He nodded toward the camera. To anyone watching, you don't need to pick sides. You need to pick standards. Don't let charisma trick you into thinking it's the same as character. Then he turned and walked off set. No mic drop. No dramatic exit music. Just footsteps and truth. Joe stood there, alone at his table, no script left to follow. Backstage, producers were scrambling. Some wanted to cut the whole segment. Others argued it was the most important conversation they'd filmed in months. Meanwhile, the internet was already exploding. Clips of Denzel's final words went viral in seconds. Memes, debates, reactions. But what none of them captured was what came next, the moment after Denzel left, when Joe looked into the lens, then slowly removed his headset. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to, because the silence said everything. The clip of Denzel's walkout hit 20 million views in 12 hours. People weren't just sharing it, they were quoting it. That one line repeated everywhere. You don't need to pick sides. You need to pick standards. It was printed on t-shirts, turned into tweets, and even used in political speeches on both sides of the aisle. But behind all that noise, something more subtle had started to happen. Joe Rogan was quiet. He didn't tweet. He didn't post. He didn't comment on the backlash or the applause or the think pieces dissecting every second of the conversation. For the first time in a long time, Joe Rogan didn't have an answer. Because Denzel hadn't played the role Joe expected. He hadn't been the Hollywood elite ready to spar, or the polite guest who knew to back off when things got tense. He'd stayed grounded. He had spoken with clarity, and that clarity had cut deeper than any insult. Joe's team was divided. Some thought he should issue a rebuttal. Others told him to ignore it entirely. But Joe couldn't ignore it, because the moment had pierced something inside him. 3 days after the interview, Joe recorded a solo podcast. No guests, no sponsors, no ads. He sat in silence for a long time before speaking. He said, I've been thinking a lot about what Denzel said. And not because he embarrassed me. I'm not embarrassed. I invited him on because I respect him. Still do. He paused again. I built this show so people could speak freely. That includes me. That includes him. And yeah, sometimes I push. Sometimes I let people talk who maybe don't deserve the mic. I've said that before. I'll own that again. Joe leaned into the mic. But here's the part that stuck with me. When he said I built something big, and now I have to choose what I do with it. Another pause. I didn't start this show to be a hero. I'm not a journalist. I'm a guy with questions. But maybe that's not enough anymore. The podcast ended there. No outro. No music. Just a fade to black. And for many, that was the most honest thing Joe Rogan had ever done. But the story didn't end there. Because the conversation had sparked something bigger. On other shows, celebrities and thinkers started revisiting what it meant to have a platform. They began re-evaluating interviews that had once passed as entertainment. The baiting questions, the gotcha moments, the casual disrespect passed off as boldness. And the line Denzel had drawn, between charisma and character, kept reappearing. On college campuses, in classrooms, even in boardrooms. One viral video showed a high school student quoting the line during a debate competition. She said, "We don't need louder voices. We need deeper values." The room had erupted in applause. As for Denzel, he didn't do a victory lap. He didn't tweet. He didn't issue a statement. He just kept working. A quiet, almost defiant refusal to play the media game the way it was designed. When a reporter caught up with him weeks later and asked about the interview, Denzel simply said, "It wasn't about Joe. It was about all of us. We're all on platforms now. Some of us just haven't realized it yet." And then he walked away. By the time the dust settled, the moment had already become something else. It was no longer just about Denzel Washington or Joe Rogan. It was about the invisible line so many had been pretending wasn't there. The line between honesty and performance. Between asking questions and hiding behind them. Between reaching people and using people. For weeks after the broadcast, Denzel's name remained in headlines. Not because he courted them, but because his words had done what so few could. They lingered. The quote had made its way into op-eds, classrooms, late-night monologues, even church sermons. Not because it was catchy, but because it forced people to confront the question no one liked to ask. What happens when the person asking all the questions finally gets asked one? Behind the scenes, Joe's team kept the show running. The next episodes were safer, less pointed. The laughter returned. The rhythm stabilized. But the energy had shifted. The audience noticed. They noticed when Joe started pushing back a little more thoughtfully. When he no longer let misinformation hang in the air without challenging it. When he took longer pauses. Less filler. Fewer smirks. And though he never said it out loud, people could feel it. The confrontation with Denzel had changed him. Not because it humiliated him, but because it demanded something more. The final piece came weeks later, in an interview Joe gave to a small independent outlet. The host, unpolished but earnest, asked him directly, "Do you think Denzel was right?" Joe took a breath. He said, "I think. He made me look in a mirror I'd been avoiding. That's uncomfortable. That's rare. But it's what truth does. It doesn't humiliate you. It just removes the costumes." The host asked, "Are you glad it happened?" Joe nodded slowly. "Yeah, I am. Because it reminded me what this was all supposed to be. Not a performance. Not a cult of personality. Just people trying to figure things out." And with that, the last part of the story fell into place. It wasn't a clash. It wasn't a takedown. It was a correction. A course correction. A reminder that in a world flooded with noise, there is still room for signal. For clarity. For someone to walk into a room and say, without raising their voice, "That's enough." Not to win, but to wake people up. Denzel never returned to the show. He didn't need to. The moment had done its work. And for once, in an age of outrage and endless noise, something real had happened. Not because it was explosive, but because it was true. And the truth, once spoken, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard.